a tree. They put the axe on his shoulder, and he went. When he reached the tree, he was looking for the axe, and he could not get it. And therefore, it became normal for the community to realize, to say, when you are old and forgetting, it is normal. And yet, we are being told there is something that can be done about it. Can we prevent it? Can we slow the progress? Is there a way of supporting people who eventually develop dementia? Whose burden is it? Is it that of the person, or is it that of the family, or is it that of the community, or is it that of the nation? So all these are things that we need to learn. There are a lot of things that we still do not know, and literature or information in this aspect in our setup is really not there. So it is an opportunity for us to begin to delve into looking for information, understanding these conditions better. The amount of myth and confusion around epilepsy, for the sake of Jessica, if I tell you, if I'm an epileptic patient and walked behind you and you're pregnant, they will say, because I did that, your baby will develop epilepsy. That's the myth about it. That you acquire it by somebody who has the condition walking around. And if you start fitting here, nobody wants to touch you because they think you transmit the disease to them. So there are a lot of myths in all these conditions. Mental health is an area that is anything. Maling and Kundu here understands better the kind of problem that they face every day when people consult. So these are areas that we purposely chose to work around in order to help support our people who are suffering these conditions, those who need to support them, and also the health system. Because even the health system is quite deficient in the way the handling of these conditions is being done. So we thank you for coming. I thank my colleague, Dr. Wakida, who pushes me a bit sometimes. I am not exactly young, but she makes me sit up at night sometimes, like last night after 3 a.m. to be conservative, working. But it is always good to have somebody like her to work with. I am praying that Dr. Kundu now will take over from me to sit and work with her, because I'm about to exit the stage. I have been dancing, but slowly my strokes are beginning to weaken. But I'm hoping that as an institution, Bara University is growing. Dr. Katamba knows very well. We all have our background in Makerere, and he knows. Makerere is beginning to say, I think there are certain things we can now pass the relay on to Bara University, or share with Bara University certain things. I think the time when lecturers used to travel from Kampala to come and give lectures here is now almost gone. It is still there for some programs, but I think slowly we are beginning to see how we have built capacity here with support from Makerere. I'm not saying we are cutting off ties with Makerere. We still value the partnership that we have with Makerere as a whole. And for that matter, Bishop Stuart University will continue to value the support that Bara University gives them. Same with Lira University. So that slowly we grow trees, so that as we age, we are going to be able to sit under these trees and enjoy the shade provided by these trees. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention. I think the program now allows me to hand the Gazindalo back to Ajay. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor. Professor, the words that will be written when you leave must is research, promoting research. When you came, it was war, but now everyone loves to jump on the wagon of research. Thank you so much, Professor. and that will be remembered of you. Ladies and gentlemen, my first time to see the BSU bus, I was like, which university is this that doesn't know how to spell the word bus? BSU. And then the other side they are written bus. I'm like, are they trying to tell students to cross-match? You know, baby class, cross-match the right word. BSU, bus. So BSU, thank you so much for attending this. Ladies and gentlemen, after Professor has spoken, it's my humble request that we rise up in a moment of silence to honor Professor Christine Dronzoa, who passed on yesterday. May her soul rest in eternal peace. Who was Professor Dronzoa? That is a question to everyone. Who? My team, please get the microphone. Everyone give me one word about her. May I know she was a mentor?
Not everyone. You say one sentence.
One sentence. Professor, that is ambushing me. Let me also attack someone. Who was Professor Dronzoa?
She was the first female professor in West Nile, and she was the vice chancellor of my university.
That is an answer that is general. Okay. Who was Professor Dronzoa?
I think as he said, I don't know what other words to add on, but she was a mentor, a teacher, and originally I have had a chance to meet her when she was still in Makerere in graduate studies. A very well-spoken professor who had passion of teaching and educating people.
She fought for, Professor, that was my answer. She fought for the girl child and always spoke her mind. She never feared anything. We shall miss her. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to now welcome our keynote address, Dr. Jessica Harper. Did I say it right? Somehow? Now this is the moment when I ask someone from Angola to come and give you a name, because these things of Nathan, come and baptize. And here when you baptize, you give a cow. Nathan, please come by the powers entrusted. And as you come, Dr. Rukundo, you see they have said you take over the mantle of research by the powers entrusted in you by the Vice Chancellor. May you be the next Vice Chancellor. That is amazing. And people have clapped and God, these people said,
Thank you, Angela, for giving me this opportunity to baptize our friend. I would wish to give you a simple word, a simple name, and a good one, Agaba. Agaba means somebody who has a passion of giving. So that's the real name.
Thank you. Don't be mistaken. Don't ask for donation here. Now you're asking for scholarship, Agaba, that they give. So, Dr. Jessica, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Why am I buzzing? Okay. I think I need to change the slide. I've never been given another name before. So I'm now Jessica Agaba. Anyway, it is such a privilege and a pleasure to be here today, so thank you very much for the invitation. It's really quite an honor to be with all of you, and also very exciting to be starting this new program. So thank you so much. So implementation science, what is its importance? So before I get started, raise your hands. Who here has done implementation science? I see 1, 2, some brave souls in the back are raising a yes over here. So maybe by the end of my talk, there may be more hands, because I think many of us have actually been doing implementation science to some extent, but this is a really important new field of its own. And I think there are many reasons why we need to consider it a field on its own. But it's very relevant to much of what I imagine many of you do day to day. So let's get started. Here's my outline for my short talk today. So we're going to start with a discussion about what is implementation science. Am I doing something to make that buzz? Is it okay? Okay. So what is implementation science? It's always important to be on the same page before we get too far along. And then we're going to talk about why it matters. Who should do it? And I promise this won't be a lecture like you're going to school, but I do want to give you a little bit of a primer, again, just to make sure we're all on the same page when we talk about implementation science. And when people come to do a PhD or come to do a short course, you'll know what it's all about. So just an overview, but bear with me, it will feel just a little bit like school. We'll talk about some theories, models, and frameworks that really underlie a lot of implementation science. We'll also talk about strategies. How do we measure what we're doing in implementation science? And thinking about how do we develop studies? What kind of designs do we use? And before concluding, I do want to spend a few minutes talking about equity and why it's important to include that in what we do among many things, but also specifically in implementation science. Okay, so what is implementation science? So this figure, this little cartoon here is a little bit fuzzy, but for those who can't read it, it says, the latest research shows that we really should do something with all this research. That was a joke. No one's laughing. Anyway, this simple cartoon, I think, is really quite poignant, because we all spend, as researchers, we spend so much time doing our research, but so often it's such a tragedy that that research does not actually impact policy. It does not impact patients. And it's, as Professor Bua was saying, we want to make a difference with epilepsy, with dementia. You could go on and on, you can fill in the gap. There are so many fields in which we're not having the impact that we really want to have, with evidence that we work very hard to create, but we're not getting there. And that's what implementation science is all about. It's really a rigorous approach, a formalized way of thinking about evidence-based interventions and how we can get more impact. So just a little bit of background. Why do we have implementation science? As I was saying, many of us actually do this to some extent, but why do we need an actual field? Why do we need a PhD? Why do we need short courses in implementation science? So as I've noted up here on the screen, sorry, that arrow's in the way. Just ignore the little arrows.
That is on the wall.
Oh, it's on the wall. Okay, we'll just ignore them. So this is what I would call a relatively new field, meaning a couple of decades, but in academia, that's pretty new. And it's really a new field to address challenges associated with the use of research to get more evidence-based practice into healthcare and other sectors. So early implementation research, before the field really started to become its own, was empirically driven. It was not necessarily theory driven. And that basically seemed like an expensive way to do trial and error. And those who developed the field of implementation science said, can't we do better? Can't we apply the rigor that we apply to all these other aspects of science and medicine and apply it to how we implement the evidence base that we're developing? And there were mixed results with this early attempt in implementation science. So a field was born. And over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's really been a better understanding of how and why implementation succeeds or fails. I think the buzzing has something to do with where I'll stand back maybe a little. And it's creating opportunities to identify factors that predict implementation success and to develop strategies that allow for more successful implementation. So what does implementation science apply to? As I've been hinting, it really applies to anything. It can be interventions, it can be programs, it can be practice, systems, policies, pretty much anything. So this first bullet point up here about effectiveness research. So when I say effectiveness research, this is really the type of research that most of us think about with research. It's a hypothesis, you have your objectives, you collect data, you do analysis, and you find out if something works or not. That's an effectiveness study. So how does that compare to implementation science research? So there are many ways to bundle this field, and I'll go through several examples, but they would largely fall into these three categories here. So implementation determinants. What affects the ability of people to access an EBI? So an EBI is an acronym, if you're not familiar with. It means evidence-based intervention. So I'll continue to refer to EBIs, just for simplicity. With implementation strategies, what tactics help people access that EBI? And then with the outcomes, how well do people actually access it? Now these may seem like simple questions, but as I said at the beginning, when we haven't done this kind of research with the methodologies that I'll talk about, the results have been not so great. And so this is really a science about adding rigor to this process of understanding what makes implementation possible, what facilitates it, what's a barrier, how do we go about doing it, and then at the end of the day to say, did we really do it? And did we do it well? Okay, so why does implementation science matter? You're in the room, so I'm going to assume you've at least bought into the choir that it does matter. But let's talk a little bit more about why. So just as an example, I'm not going to focus on specifically epilepsy, dementia, mental health. We'll hear more about that later on. But let's look at cancer. I think we all know how prevalent cancer is. If we took all of the knowledge we have today about prevention of cancer, there are estimates, and you'll see little references for all of the tidbits I'm going to give you in this talk. But this group of researchers estimated that we could prevent half of all new cancers if we just did more with what we know today. I mean, just think about that. Think about how much time and effort is spent on new discoveries for new therapies. And thank goodness we have that research ongoing. And think about how much more benefit we could give to our patients if we were able to better implement what we already know about preventing cancer. How about this one? The gap between discovery and use is often 17 years. 17 years. Do we want to wait 17 years for that important finding that you discovered to really reach its audience? I work a lot on PrEP, so prevention of HIV, and we're seeing this even today. You know, this story happened with many drugs that I've looked at in the past, but I've been very closely involved with PrEP, and I'm watching it happen again. Even though we're trying really hard with implementation science, I think we're making some progress. But from discovery to implementation of actual use where people can get PrEP when they want it, how they want it, where they want it, we're going in this direction, and we need to do better. Not just for PrEP, but for many, many diseases, especially dementia, epilepsy, and mental health as we're focusing here today. Implementation is often inequitable if we don't support it. We'll come back to this in a little while and how we can think about preventing inequities and disparities, but we have to be proactive and intentional about it, and that's part of implementation science. So as I've been saying, patients don't get better without implementation science. They don't get better as quickly, I should say. So if we can't get effective therapies to them, if we as healthcare providers don't know how to provide those therapies, if the patients themselves don't end up using what we know works, that's where a lot of my research is in adherence, then we really need to do better. As I've mentioned, trial and error is not a great way to go. Sometimes that's what there is, but it's slow and it helps us get across the finish line in terms of achieving improved outcomes. So who should do implementation science? I think the short answer is really all of us in some way, shape, or form. Maybe at the bench, okay, maybe you don't have to do that. But if you're out there doing clinical research, you're out there interacting with patients or clients, implementation science can actually be part of almost any study. So if you're discovering better ways to treat patients, if you're using those discoveries to improve the lives of patients, implementation science is helpful. If you're a policymaker, I'm not sure who all is in the room, but if you're a policymaker and you have to decide how you're going to implement these discoveries, or you have to make choices, which we all do, limited resources, implementation science can help you. Okay, so now we're going to school just for a few minutes, so bear with me. We're going to start with theories, models, and frameworks. So those of you who've done a little bit of implementation science, you've heard these terms. And they often get battered around, and I think it's worth just a moment to clarify what exactly do we mean by a theory, a model, or framework. So you can see the definitions listed up here. And I'll try to give you a little bit of a sense as to what each one means, but they do sometimes get jargled. So if you say theory and you mean model, it's quite okay. I think the idea is to have an approach that's rigorous and systematic, and these are some tools to help us do that. So with the theory, it's a set of interrelated concepts, variables that help predict outcomes and explain causal mechanisms for implementation. I think that causal piece is really important. That's what I anchor on when I think about a theory. And then if we take a look at models, so these are approaches that are used to describe or guide the process of translating research into practice. So with the models, I'm thinking about that process and describing and explaining that. And then with frameworks, it's really a description of factors that are believed or found to influence implementation outcomes. I think of frameworks as being very practical, almost like checklists. And just to complicate things even more, in addition to the confusion that can come around these terms, there are dozens of these things. It seems like every week there's another one. Because people are excited about this field, I'm excited about this field. And so people are coming up with new ideas, new models, theories, frameworks. So how do we keep track of all that? How do we decide what to do? Because each one has its own purpose. So I won't go through the dozens and dozens of them, but I want to give you a couple of rubrics that may help you think about what do all these frameworks, models, and theories do, and how do we think about using them? So as you can see here, this is from a pretty seminal paper by Nilsson that describes 5 categories for these models, frameworks, and theories. The first one are process models. And these are specific steps that help you translate research into practice. And I've listed some examples for each of these. I'm going to go through a few of them in just a moment. But this is a nice category to think about really that process of translation. Then there are determinate frameworks. So these are really looking at barriers and facilitators that influence implementation outcomes. Then there are what are called classic theories. So these may be theories that have been out there, like the example I've listed here is social cognitive theory. So those psychologists in the room, behavioral scientists in the room, you've probably heard of that. It can work for implementation science too. So it's not that everything has to be new within implementation science, but you can borrow theories from other fields and apply them for implementation. That said, there are also very specific implementation theories. So every field of science likes to create its own theories, and that's what this category is, like the COMBI, which is one of the more popular models. And then finally, evaluation frameworks. So these are pretty straightforward, more, I think, around that checklist idea specifying aspects of implementation to evaluate success. So really, what has happened? How do we think about that as a metric? Those kind of frameworks are considered evaluative. Okay, so let's go through a few examples. So I'll start with the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research. And I chose this one to start because this is sort of the mother of all frameworks. This one was developed, it was consolidated to include many, many different frameworks in one. And not, no one framework or a model could really do everything. But this is a pretty comprehensive way of thinking about a determinant style of framework. It's really understanding barriers and facilitators that influence outcomes. And I know the print here is a little bit small, but I'll make these slides available, so don't feel like you have to squint and try to write them down. But this is a framework that I've used several times to try and understand where should we be going when we're thinking about implementation. If I have an EBI, what do I need to be paying attention to as I develop my strategy for implementing? And the CFIR, as it's called, looks at 5 different domains. So we're looking at the intervention itself. What can we do to help with implementation of the intervention? We look at the individual. What about an individual using that EBI could help or hinder implementation? We think about the inner setting, so maybe a clinic, a hospital, some sort of program. What about each of those areas could help or hinder implementation? We have to think about the outer context. What are the competing priorities that policymakers may be dealing with? Other programs, other interventions? What can we do with that outer setting, again, to promote implementation? And then finally, process. You'll hear that word a lot. What is the process of implementing? What are those barriers and facilitators? Put that all together to think about how to get to that finish line. Precede, proceed. It's example number 2. So I kind of like precede, proceed because it's another way of being comprehensive. Before you proceed with something, you have to really explore what's going on in a setting. And this is sort of a combination of a determinant and a process model. So in that precede stage, you're looking at social assessments, epidemiologic assessments, education, administration. Not every aspect has to apply to every study, but you think about these different factors. And this was, I think, originally developed for education, health education, but it can be applied to almost any intervention. But the idea is you really explore the context before you think about how do I move forward with a strategy. And so once you've done that, you create your strategy, and then you implement it in these different phases. We have process evaluations, impact evaluations, outcome evaluations, and you're paying attention to these predisposing, reinforcing, enabling factors. You may not need genetics for every study or behavior environment, but you probably need one of them, maybe 2 or all 3. And then you think about how all of those together equate to health and quality of life. So this, I think, is a really interesting model. And the final example I give you is REAIM. And I would say this is probably the most famous, if you will, of implementation frameworks. REAIM has been around a long time. It's a very helpful framework to think about evaluation. It's also very colorful, which I always think is nice. So with REAIM, you want to think about the reach. How do I reach the targeted population? You want to measure that. And I won't be going too much into specific metrics, but you want to really think about it. You can't stop with, I delivered the intervention at the clinic. You have to think about who did it really, really reach. Effectiveness. We're talking about evidence-based interventions, but was it effective in this setting? Did it work the way you thought it would work? Adoption. How did that go? Who took it up? Did that go as you thought it would? That can be really important in thinking about maybe alternative strategies if you didn't reach everybody that you wanted to. With implementation, can you know that the intervention was actually implemented the way you thought it would be? What's the fidelity with your study? And then finally, maintenance. We want to make sure that what we set out to do is maintained. If it just works while you're there, that's nice. But you want it to be integrated into whatever setting you're working in so that it carries on and has that lasting impact. Okay, let's move on now to strategies. So we've talked about models, theories, frameworks. Let's think about strategies. So this is another very famous model. It's called the Proctor Model. It was developed by another Proctor, hence the name. And I'm going to show you this figure a couple of times, because this is another fairly comprehensive model. And we're going to focus on that area in the red here. But implementation strategies are really processes to move evidence-based interventions into practice. And like many of the things I'm talking about today, there are multiple ways you can do it. You can look at a single strategy, or you can look at multiple strategies depending on your context. And with Proctor, she outlined first the intervention strategies. So the intervention strategy is what we typically think of with research, and that's where you establish the effectiveness. Okay, so we're going to take that as our starting point with implementation science and move into that strategy. And with the strategy, she's categorized it into system environment, organizational, group or learning, supervision, or individual providers and consumers. Keep the outcomes in mind for later, but this is one way to think about where do I target my implementation strategy. It could be in one or more of those different categories. So what are some examples of these strategies? Some of these may look very familiar. Again, you've probably been doing some of these at some point in your career. You maybe just didn't realize that was implementation science. So the first one, evaluate and iterate. A classic example of that is an audit and feedback, where you see what happens when you introduce an EBI into a clinic, and then you take note of it, you summarize it, and see if you can improve how well they've taken up that EBI. I imagine many of you have done that, but that's a classic implementation strategy. Adapting to context. We do this all the time. We tailor interventions to the local needs. And there can sometimes be some tension there, because the more you change something, the further away you get from that original evidence base. So like in the REA model, you have to measure effectiveness as you go. But that adaptation is also critical, so measuring how you're doing the adaptation as you go is important. But the intentionality around these strategies is really key to keeping the rigor at a high level. Training and educating stakeholders. We all do in-service trainings, but that's a strategy. Engaging consumers, changing infrastructure. Again, these are things that are very common but important to really measure and track. Providing interactive assistance, simple things like having warm lines or hot lines can really help with implementation. Behavioral economics, many of you may have done that type of research before where you provide incentives. That's another strategy that can really further implementation. And then one of my favorites is developing stakeholder interrelationships. Finding champions, people within an inner setting from the CFR model, somebody who can really make sure that that intervention happens the way the evidence base suggests it gets used. And they can let you know if it's not happening that way, and that can feed you back into another strategy if you need to. So I love the idea of champions and working with early adopters. And then one other way of thinking about implementation strategies are these 5 categories that I'm showing up here. This was published by Lehman and colleagues. So thinking about implementation in terms of dissemination, so what kind of messaging are you using to get your EBI into practice? There are a couple that fall under delivery systems, so implementation processes, integration, and then there are a couple that fall under more of a support system. So how do you build capacity? How do you scale up? And thinking about your strategies in those categories. So next I'm going to move on to just a brief mention of implementation outcomes. So as promised, here's the Proctor model again, but now we're going to focus more on the right here. And sorry, those arrows are right in the middle of implementation outcomes. But I like the way Proctor has broken up outcomes into 3 different larger categories. So implementation outcomes are the ones that we often think about. So is something feasible? Is it acceptable? How much did it cost? And there are simple metrics that you can use under these outcomes. But if you don't intentionally set out to measure them, you won't really know them. Again, that's really a core piece of implementation science. There are also service outcomes, so things like efficiency, equity, again, we're going to come back to that, timeliness. These kind of factors really can make a difference in terms of uptake of an evidence-based intervention. And finally, client outcomes. This is becoming a really big area in the US where people are looking at PROMs, or patient-reported outcome measures, to understand not just how we think about an intervention, but how do our clients, how do our patients feel about that intervention? Is it having the same kind of impact that we think it's going to in their frame of reference? And I noted down here that this is a kind of go-to practical approach and talking about type 1 designs, which we'll get to in a moment. In fact, we'll get to it very soon, study designs. Okay, so the final bit of our primer here is about study designs. So we can think of pure implementation science as a study that's really around implementation, measuring those strategies I've been talking about, looking at those metrics. And that's a great way to go. I think a lot of research that comes out of this program will be in more or less pure implementation science. But there's also a really important category called a hybrid effectiveness implementation trial. And I'm a big fan of these because they're efficient and they help us move forward. They help us get that 17-year timeline from discovery to use down by many years, because it's a way of combining trials at the same time. So these can be broken up into 3 types. This is according to the Curran paper, which I've cited up there. It's another one of these seminal papers in implementation science. So a type 1 trial is really going to be focused primarily on establishing effectiveness. And you don't just want to jump into a type 1 trial if you've never done anything to show that your intervention works. But if you've got a pretty good idea that the intervention works and you just need to expand it to a new population, or you need to go from pilot to full scale, but you've got really strong evidence with high effect sizes, maybe a type 1 is the way to go. So that as you really prove that effectiveness, you also measure some idea of what is it going to take to implement this intervention. And it gets you a leg up on implementation, but you're still focused primarily on effectiveness. I'm going to jump to type 3, which is really focused on the implementation strategies. So say you have an intervention that you really know works, but it's just a slightly different setting or a slightly different population. And you want to focus more on deciding, do I want to go with a champion model, like I was saying before, or do I want to do something that's more like an in-service training with audit and feedback? But you do both of those together. That's a type 3. And then finally type 2, it's 50-50. So you want to do both. And sometimes both need attention in an equal amount. But some mix between type 1 and type 3, you can decide where you draw the line. But this idea of doing them together can really expedite the impact of implementation science. And this pictorial here, I think, nicely puts all of this together to think about where implementation science goes in this whole process from discovery to improved health. So we start with clinical efficacy research, so establishing truth in terms of an intervention's effect. We go to clinical effectiveness. How does that work in reality outside of a classical phase 3 trial? Then we can throw in these hybrids I just mentioned, where you're teetering back and forth between implementation and effectiveness. Or you might have a pure implementation project, and ultimately we end up with improved processes and outcomes. Okay, so this moment about equity in implementation science. So I think there's been a lot of attention and very important emphasis put on the fact that there are a lot of disparities in outcomes that have nothing to do with the science. It has to do with how we use the evidence that we have. Who gets access to something? Who doesn't get access? Who gets the benefit that really should be available to anyone? And that doesn't always happen. And there are a lot of reasons, and I won't go too far into it, but suffice it to say that if we pay attention and we're very purposeful about how we implement, I think we can avoid some of the inequities that often enter into practice. So one way to do that is with something called participatory action research. And this doesn't only apply to implementation science, but I think it is really critical. And the key principle here is that sustainable implementation requires adoption of interventions that are locally adapted, appropriate, acceptable, feasible, and cost-effective to deliver. And the key with this idea of participatory action research is that you have to have people participate in it. That's very straightforward, but I think it's something we often don't do. Science is hard. We spend a lot of time thinking about it. We talk to our colleagues about it. We go to PubMed, we read papers. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in 2 a.m. nights, but sometimes we forget to talk to the people at the end of the line and to engage them in the process. Having dissemination events, working with community advisory groups and so forth. And you can see these cycles here of planning, acting, observing, reflecting, and continuing to do that, but introducing the setting, the stakeholders, the key populations in that process is really vital in terms of equity. And I don't know if this is projecting very well, but this is a model called Aspire, and it's really a way to be very proactive about these issues in implementation science. And you can see the citation with Gaius there. But it's really a pretty straightforward 3-step approach to improving equity in implementation science. And it starts with identifying the underlying assumptions and considering them, thinking about potential sources of disparities, again, considering how can we avoid those, and then adapting whatever strategy you're using to account for all of that. Okay, so let's put it all together. So let's say one of you becomes the next PhD candidate. How are you going to do this? So I put 10 easy steps up here on the slide to think through as you want to get started in your implementation science. So you're going to identify an area of research. You're going to establish partnerships with those stakeholders from the very beginning. It's really important. You're going to define what your issues are, what are your questions. And again, this is probably stuff that a lot of us have done outside of implementation science, but we're going to focus again on the field here. And then we're going to go to developing a logic model. And stay tuned on that one. I'll get to that in more detail in the next slide. But this is a comprehensive way of thinking about all these theories, models, and frameworks that I've been talking about. Then we're going to identify methods for how do we want to evaluate the implementation of our evidence-based intervention. We're going to identify implementation determinants to begin with. Then we're going to select, tailor, and develop an implementation strategy. Then we're going to identify what outcomes we want and make sure that we measure them throughout the project. Then we're going to conduct and tailor implementation, perhaps on a micro level. There may be some iteration involved. That's very commonly done in implementation science. And then we're going to disseminate. Easy, right? Okay. So this logic model that I mentioned, so this is a relatively new idea within implementation science, but I think it's really helpful as a holistic guide going through every step of what I've just described. And I know there's a lot of detail up on the slide that I won't go through, but if you look back on this later, it's a really great way to summarize everything I've been talking about today. So it starts with implementation determinants, and all of the factors that need to be considered. Then it goes into the strategies and how those relate, how those also impact on the evidence-based intervention itself. Then you have to think through the mechanisms of how this is all working, making sure you're really capturing everything that could be causal in the implementation pathway. These all kind of feed together, and then thinking about those outcomes, whether it's the actual implementation, the service, or the health outcomes. And this, you can see probably from the language, is borrowing from several of the different methods, models, theories, and frameworks that I've been talking about, like the CFR or Proctor or others. So in conclusion, implementation science involves rigorous methodologies to understand barriers and facilitators to the use of evidence-based interventions. Implementation science helps us develop and test strategies to increase the use of these EBIs. Implementation science helps us to ensure that people benefit from these interventions we work so hard to develop. And discovery alone is not enough. Engaging with stakeholders throughout the process is really critical for achieving equity in implementation science. And I think what's really important to walk away with today is that this is becoming standard of practice. So even if you don't join the program and get a PhD, I hope you'll consider at least a short course, because this is really the wave of the future for clinical research and how we're really going to have the strongest, most impact with our clients, our participants, our patients, and particularly in this program, how we can make a difference with dementia, mental health, and epilepsy. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. And thank you again for this opportunity to launch this program and hopefully to extend some of my enthusiasm for the field and draw you in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica Agaba. Yes, we're getting used to the name. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall have a Q&A session, but you've been listening for long and we're dealing with non-communicable diseases. I kindly request that you stand up. Now you see the young generation is not taking long to stand up. Okay, do you have a paper in front of you? Professor who has done this before. You have a paper, please pick a paper quickly. Show me the paper you've picked. Where you can write. Yes, put it at the back of your head. Get a pen. Draw your neighbor's face. Why are you laughing? We're drinking. So start. Draw the big circle, that is the head. Thank you. Put the eyes there. 2 eyes, please. Put the nose. Okay, and put, what is that face one? Put the lips around, yes. Show your neighbor their face. Really? Some people are even putting on specs. Okay, one more. Our presenter is called Jessica, and we're writing her name in capital letters, starting J, down. No, we're writing now with our bodies. Okay, down, move a bit, and then do the, is that J, Manang? Is that J? Don't copy me, you do your J. Okay, let's go E, down, move, up, that one, up, that one. Thank you. Next is S. Dr. Rukundo, you've written Z. Another S. Okay, I. Down, up. Yes. Do the C. The person of the name has written the C like me. And letter A. Down, up, slide a bit, down, up. The middle thing, miss it. Dr. Edith, you are going to give us the overview of BMLS, and the floor is yours. Thank you. Devandeka has told me to say it's BIMS, not BMLS. Bachelor of Medical Lab Science and what?
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Jessica, for the presentation, and thank you all for coming. As Lawrence looks for my presentation, I will begin by thanking all of us for coming. Thank you for honoring the invitation and coming to be part of this launch. We are honored. We will not take it for granted because you have a lot doing, but you've come to sit here and listen to us speak. First, I would like to introduce my friends. I love psychiatry. How many psychiatrists are in the house? Psychiatry psychiatrists, so if you came from the Department of Psychiatry, please stand up. Thank you. Professor Obua introduced the Training Advisory Committee. The key person.
The mentor, the scholar,
Yes. There's a lot of light in front of me, so I cannot see properly. The Training Advisory Committee was introduced. I will introduce the mentors. In the house, we have Doctors Ashava Scholar. Please stand up for recognition. We have Dr. Ainamani Habat, Dr. Joseph Kilabina, Dr. Godfrey Zari Rukundo, Dr. Samuel Maling. On Zoom, we have Dr. Helen Jakwaga, who has a medic. We also have Dr. Francis Bajunire, who is not here. He sent his apologies. We have expert trainers, Dr. Jessica Habara of Hebara, Agaba. We have Dr. Shoba Ramanathan, and Moses Ochan is here. Research methods. Thank you all for coming. We have our training coordinator, Peace Kellen. Please stand up. No. Okay, thank you. Now, BIMS, building capacity for implementation science in non-communicable diseases. When we say non-communicable diseases, everybody is used to CVDs, stroke, diabetes, hypertension. But I said I love psychiatrists, and so we thought about the non-communicable diseases which are not always mentioned, and that's what we decided to focus on. Mental health, dementia. Our lives have improved, and so we are living a bit longer, and so it's important to be knowledgeable about dementia and how to manage it. We also have epilepsy and alcohol use disorders. Those are mental disorders or mental health related disorders or illnesses that are perhaps not commonly recognized as NCDs, and yet they are NCDs. So BIMS has chosen to focus on that. We put up this grant with Professor Obua. It's a multiple PI-PD approach, and I am honored to be riding on his shoulders as a multiple PI with him. And our goal is to establish a training hub at MUST that will provide leadership, best practices, research support, mentoring and training in epidemiological prevention and implementation science approaches in NCDs across the lifespan. And the NCDs here are dementia, epilepsy, alcohol use disorders, and which one? Yeah. And we are working together with our partner institutions in the rural setting. Mbara University is in the rural, and we are working with our partners, Bishop Stewart University and Lira University. We have worked with the two institutions on the HAPPY program, and we are continuing with them to build their capacity so that in the future they will also be able to stand on their own. Now, the BIMS has 4 specific aims. The first one is to create a training hub, and this is going to be at MUST. Because we have built a bit of our capacity at MUST, we are supporting partner institutions to grow. So we are setting up the research training hub to support our partners to grow, just like we also were able to grow after riding on the shoulders of Makerere University. The second specific aim is to train clinicians and health professionals in basic epidemiological prevention and implementation science skills to conduct research in NCDs across the lifespan in rural Uganda. So across the lifespan, we are talking about children, adolescents, and adults. And then we'll provide mentor training for the mentors, because we believe that mentorship is key to development, and so we are fronting mentorship, and so we have a complete aim for the mentors to support the mentors or enhance their capacity. We know by the fact that they are mentors, they already have the capacity, they have the skills, but then we have a complete aim for them, because continuous development or continuous strengthening of what they have is very important. And lastly, we are going to create a community of practice among trainees, mentors, and other principal investigators who have gone ahead of us and have training grants in non-communicable diseases. We already have one at MAST under Dr. Francis Bajinire. So we are going to look for the synergies and work together in the community of practice. I just highlighted the NCDs of interest in the Blms, neurological disorders. And when we say neurological disorders, we are referring to epilepsy and dementia. And we are going to look at evaluating evidence-based recommendations for the evaluation and treatment of patients with epilepsy in children, adolescents, and adults, and then community-based care and management of people with dementia in low and middle-income countries. When we are looking at the mental health area, we intend to support the trainee to come up with or to develop and test a model and methods for implementing mental health interventions in low-resource healthcare systems. We all know our healthcare system, and so the trainee in that area is going to develop and test an evidence-based intervention that should be able to help our healthcare systems in the low-resource setting. We also chose alcohol use disorders, and under this area, we look at development of evidence-based interventions for the treatment of alcohol use disorders in primary health care. Our main focus is lower health facilities, not the tertiary institutions. And lastly, we have implementation science. Dr. Hebara has ably talked about implementation science methods and frameworks. We shall keep talking about that a bit more so that we get used to that, because we are going to use those methods to develop interventions in the 3 or 4 areas of interest. And in this case, we are looking at the implementation science methods for evidence-based practice in the care of either dementia, epilepsy, mental health, or alcohol use disorders. Now, Mbarara University is the prime awardee, and we have partners. We have partners in the US, and that is California University of Science and Medicine, as well as Claremont Graduate University. They are both found in San Bernardino in California. We also have Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Global Health, where Dr. Hebara works, but she also works with Harvard Medical School and also collaborates with Harvard School of Public Health, where our other expert trainer is coming from. And then we have 2 national partners, Lira University, who are going to give us the trainees, and Bishop Stewart University. We shall also have trainees from Mbarara University. So the partner institutions are contributing faculty and trainers. So the program leadership, Professor Boa talked about it. I will not say more about that. I also introduced the administrator or the training coordinator. We have a program implementation committee, which is composed of the MPIs, that's the multiple PIs. We have key persons, Dr. Rukundo is one of them. We have the expert trainers, the project administrator, we shall have deans from the Faculty of Medicine and of Health Sciences. So the dean at MAST, dean at BSU, and dean at Lira University will be part of the implementation committee. And then we have the training advisory committee, who are experts. We have an expert in mental health, implementation science, grant administration and management, and then we have the vice chancellors of the partner institutions. Like I said, mentorship is going to be key, and it's a very important mechanism through which our trainees will have to develop into independent researchers. We propose to have a rich array of mentors, and we also have program faculty from the institutions that I mentioned. And each trainee is going to be assigned 2 mentors, one from Uganda and one from the US. And these mentors are going to help the trainees to identify and focus their research projects in the relevant areas of interest. We have we are taking the training in 2 arms. We have the long-term training and the short-term training. So for the long-term training, we have the PhD training, and here we are looking at a full range of skills necessary to plan, conduct, manage, and disseminate results on research on NCDs, and in this case, the 4 NCDs of focus. And then we have the short term, which is tailored specifically to the trainees. So we have that in kind of like 3 pieces. We have the short courses that are tailored to the PhD trainees. We have the short courses that will be open to anybody who is interested, provided you think they are relevant to you. And the open courses are going to include grant administration and management. That is kind of like the umbrella name. But in there we have financial management, grant writing, we have scientific manuscript writing. If you kind of recall the model that we used with the MUTI project, which ended, that's the approach we are going to take for the short courses. But for the ones tailored specifically to the PhD trainees, we are going to have the implementation science, and depending on the subscription, we shall open it up to other trainees. We'll have specific training in dementia, epilepsy, mental health, alcohol use disorders. We have invited the Department of Psychiatry here because these particular short courses are going to be very relevant to them. We are also going to have training in mentor training, and this is going to be spearheaded by our expert trainer, Dr. Jessica Hebara. So for the long-term training, we proposed to train 6 PhDs, and these are going to come from MAST, BSU, and Lira University for the development of implementation of evidence-based interventions across the lifespan. I will keep talking about the NCDs, and when I say the NCDs, then we just look at our banner to see our areas of focus, so that when we think neurological disorders, we are not just thinking about the common ones that are cardiovascular related or hypertension, or the common ones that have been known. All the trainees are going to be encouraged to attend training in responsible conduct of research, because you are going to conduct mentored research, and you will receive ethics clearance from Bara Research Ethics Committee. All PhDs are going to be students at Mbara University, and so we shall go through the systems at Mbara University. The PhD students will have to present their research work at a conference or national conferences, and will be required to have at least 2 first author publications and submit 1 extramural grant application. That will be proof that indeed your capacity has been built. For trainee recruitment, All trainees need to be employees at MAST, BSU, and Lira University with health professions background or social science background. And beneficiaries from the MADRI project are going to be eligible to compete for the PhD scholarships. And I mentioned they will be tenable at Mbara University. The training opportunity will be advertised at the websites of MAST, BSU, and Lira, and different social platforms. The applicants are going to sign contracts, but these contracts are going to be signed once we've gone through the PhD program. This is not my presentation. Yeah. The contracts will be signed once we have proof of admission. And so once we advertise and we select, then you will have to go through the Mbara University procedure to be admitted as a student. And once you have the admission letter, you will come back and sign the contract. Now, the funders offered $20,000 per trainee, and they believe that the $20,000 is sufficient to cover your tuition and research, because they believe you are employees at an institution, and so you should be able to work within the available funding. And so that is what we are going to offer to our PhD students. We are going to have 2 students, one for dementia, one for epilepsy, one for mental health, one for alcohol use disorders, and 2 will focus on implementation science, but will choose to study one of the 4 disorders. I have already talked about the mentors. The students are going to, the trainees will be assigned a mentor from Uganda and a mentor from the US. Now the mentors from the Ugandan side, Dr. Asha Baskola is specifically assigned to the student or the trainee who is going to handle the mental health area. Epilepsy is going to be supported or mentored under Dr. Rukundo and Dr. Chirabila. Alcohol use disorders will be Dr. Maling. And implementation science, we have Dr. Helen Yakwaga and myself. And then we shall work with the expert trainers to support implementation science. We also have our colleagues. Dementia is going to be handled by Dr. Herbert Ainamani. And these are going to be paired with colleagues from California University of Science and Medicine, Hani Atamna for dementia, Alan Stacy and Javad for alcohol use disorders, Kim Reynolds for implementation science, Nicole Gatto for epilepsy, and Paula Palmer for mental health. For the interest of time, I think that presentation that I have made is kind of like the overview of what we intend to do, and I am going to invite Angela or Professor. We are going to have kind of a panel. I believe questions have been coming, or you may be having questions. You need clarification so that we can work within our time. so that we can answer any questions. Instead of me going through the slides, perhaps if you have the questions, then we can address them. Angela, thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Yes, I invite our presenters of the day to come to the front and they fire you. And they ask you questions. They're not going to fire you. Professor, we die as a team, we win as a team. You'll be here. Yes. And have you ever seen you're the only gentleman there, so you're in trouble? Edith will stand.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for question and answer time. Thank you. Yes, the first question comes from me. When are we cutting cake? What are we launching? Question?
The PK will answer that.
Okay, thank you. That is answered. Next question. Yes.
Thank you very much, presenters. I have a simple question, and anybody can answer, but most especially Dr. Akita. I have seen that the PhDs will be having two mentors, one from Uganda, another one from somewhere. It's abroad. And I don't know if somebody has an area which needs another person to add on the two, is it allowed, or we have to remain with strictly the two?
I think, is it Dr. Nkongi? Kakongi is asking if a candidate has an area that requires expertise outside the two mentors, is that person allowed to bring in a third, a fourth, a fifth, sixth mentor? So I think to answer you the answer is everything is possible. What we have proposed is that for purposes of the partnerships that we have at least a mentor from the Ugandan side and a mentor from the US. Let's assume that you want to do research in maybe dementia, and you think that your work requires an expert in statistics, the kind of statistics you're doing, the two mentors may not be able to handle, and you want to bring in a statistician. In PhD work, an additional supervisor or mentor who is bringing in an expertise in an area that contributes to successful completion of your work is always welcome. I think my answer to that is that it is always possible to have more than two mentors. Of course, the more they become many, the more challenge you have as a student, because you have to juggle my idea against her idea and against the third and the fourth. But it is always possible.
Yeah, just to add, and I would use my own example. I surrounded myself with people who had expertise that I did not have. And the best way to work with all of them was to invite them onto the doctoral committee. So that's how I was supported. I had someone in implementation science, someone in mental health, someone, the skills I didn't have, those are the people who were part of the doctoral committee. I think that would be one model that can be followed.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps I'm a PhD student who is in the first year, and I'm just in my first year, and I'm already looking at epilepsy. Do I have a chance to compete in this particular round?
It's called strategy.
This idea was mooted yesterday by one of the training advisory committee members. That would it be, remember that the funding is for strictly 3 years. And one of the members of the training advisory committee said, it would be nice to take on students who are already PhD students, meaning you're already registered. However, we have said that there are certain things we want you to do, even though you are going to take a particular area of the 3 or 4 areas. We want a strong component of implementation science in it. Meaning, we will want to review your proposal within the project to fit within the scope of this project. So even if you are doing epilepsy, but you are interested in determining the cause of epilepsy, which requires you to take samples, to do gene analysis, and do neurological mapping of the brain, to do staining of the, MRI tests and so on. Remember that the funder has said this PhD candidate can only get a maximum of $20,000. So the scope of what you want to do should fit within. I would think, as people who are selling the program, I think I have no problem taking on board somebody who is already a registered PhD candidate, but opts to work within the scope of what we want to do. I would not see that as a big problem. But however, if you're already a PhD candidate, it means you already have mentors or supervisors who might be interested in a different scope or field. So marrying those interests with this interest will be a juggle, will be something for you as a student to handle. But for us, we will look at every applicant and evaluate the applicant for the merit that we think fits within what we're interested in. I think that, yeah. The key thing about this is that when Edith was presenting about the funding, the amount 20,000 was in the call. So we cannot give more, but we can give less. Yeah, we can give less, but we cannot give more. And yesterday when we were analyzing this, we found that it is possible to conduct a PhD study within Barra, carry out research, pay your tuition within the $20,000.
Yes, I'm Dr. Vega. I'm a third-year resident psychiatrist. Not saying what is talking. Yes.
Could you stand down, please, so that I see you?
Yes, I'm Dr. Vega. I'm a third-year resident psychiatrist, so I'm finishing. And my project is on alcohol analysis. And I would also probably, with hope that there is a chance to compete for the opportunity of the PhD. But my worry is, they have said that the opportunities are for only employees of the respective universities. And I hope it could be any other person as well. So, is there an opportunity that a non-employee of the above universities would also be allowed to compete for the opportunity? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Abel, is it Abel? Abel. Yes, Dr. Abel, your question is very pertinent. we have discussed that within the Training Advisory Committee meeting. But the first principles is that when we wrote the grant, we said we have these young institutions that have junior faculty who do not have PhD training. And so the funding will give us opportunity to build the capacity institutionally by training these people and allow them to achieve, to get, not only to acquire the skills and the knowledge, but also to attain PhD as part of the academic growth. Now, while we have limited that, meaning we don't want a flood of applications from Uganda. I know you are not alone, Dr. Abel. There are hundreds and thousands, no, at least not hundreds, but there are tens of persons in your position who would wish to attain or embark on PhD journey, but they are lacking funding. This would be an opportunity for them, right? But then we are saying you cannot satisfy everybody. There must be some form of restrictions. But in the very, what do the airline people say? In the event, in the unlikely event, okay, in the unlikely event that after 2 or 3 advertisements, there's not a single candidate from within this university, then we will probably adjust to say, fine, you can come as a PhD, but remember we are only supporting you with the 20,000. So that is in the very unlikely event that we actually fail to get applicants. And yet we must support training in this area within the country. So yes, we can open up in that very unlikely event. But yes, so but we have a short training. The courses which can benefit you still is that will be open to not everybody, but a limited number of people to participate in this training, and it is still beneficial. But of course, if you want a PhD, then that's a different thing. So our appeal is to the faculty, junior faculty, within these 3 institutions. We're giving the institutions opportunity to build their capacity to have PhD faculty. You know, the National Council for Higher Education recommends that for you to be a teacher in the university, you must have a PhD. But we also know that there are quite a number of teachers in these universities who do not have PhDs. And that was the basis for saying we have the number of people that can participate in this program within the universities. And moreover, we are funding only 6. And so if we really fail to get 6 people, that would be a tragedy for the institutions. Because if we train you, Abel, and the universities don't have ways to recruit you, that means, yes, we have trained you for Uganda, but you could easily go for a job in South Sudan. You know, and then we have lost that potential to have somebody on the ground. That's why we are restricting it for now, but we want to believe that, yes, tomorrow you might be employed. I'm sure Dr. Malay will argue for you to be recruited as a assistant lecturer as soon as you finish. Then automatically you qualify in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Joan Abachi, second year essential psychiatry. I have 2 questions. One was partially answered. It was about the short courses that we were supposed to do them, but I think that was partially answered. So I wanted to know, when will this, since the PhD is 3 years, will these short courses go on for 3 years? Will they be physical, online? And then the other question was, if someone is applying for the PhD and they want to do like an implementation research, but a particular implementation has ever been done somewhere, is it like acceptable to do this same implementation here to see if it also applies to this community, something like that? I hope I was clear.
Thank you. About the short courses, some of them are under development, especially the ones where the tailored ones to the 4 specific areas. Once development is complete, because they're under development, we are going to begin offering in this first year. PhD training will begin in the second year. And so we shall offer the short courses from year 1 through to year 5. So we shall have a schedule that we shall be following, showing when the short courses are going to be offered, and you will be welcome.
And thanks for the question about borrowing implementation research from other settings and applying it locally, and that's absolutely appropriate. You know, we all build on this concept of scientific premise, where we take the knowledge that's out there in the field, whether that's the EPI, the evidence-based intervention itself, or the strategies to improve implementation. You know, it's the same in the sense that if something has worked well in Kenya or Germany or Malaysia, by all means, if you think it might be applicable here, build on that. And a lot of the models and frameworks and strategies I talked about are mechanisms to adapt and to tailor appropriately for the local setting and build on it, because it can only strengthen what you're proposing to do.
Let me just add that the contextualization of what you want to do is also very important. That's why it is possible for you to repeat such a study in a different setting, because you want to see whether what has been implemented or the approach that has been used in that other setting is suitable or works or effective or whatever you want, terminology you want locally. Let me give you a history of my PhD work. So I was looking at anti-malarials at a time when malaria treatment was undergoing a lot of changes and so on. And I had my proposal to review the use of chloroquine and sulfadoxine pyrimethamine. Some of you don't remember those drugs anymore. When I presented my proposal to the Malaria Control Program Office in the Ministry of Health, the person in charge said, "We know everything about chloroquine. We know everything about malaria and sulfadoxine pyrimethamine. There's nothing new you are going to bring about." But I think he was very wrong, because you could say that my study was one of those that talked about the change in the treatment policy of malaria in Uganda. And 2, that today there is still no publication that outcompetes my publication on the pharmacokinetics of chloroquine and sulfadoxine pyrimethamine in children. And it was chosen by the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology as the best publication. Not only that, they even gave me money on top of that. So you should, that's why we look for, in your reviewing of work that has been done in that area, you look at what has been done. Where have the gaps? Where have they identified gaps? How can you apply those, trying to address those gaps in your setup? That's really the way we continue doing research in the same area over and over again, because you're looking for new directions, new findings, new ways of doing things. Otherwise, we will not be talking of gravity today because somebody discovered it a long time ago. But there are still studies going on. We don't understand about light. We don't understand about, there are a lot of things, and we have known about them for years. But people are continuing to research about that. I saw a hand somewhere. Angela? Oh,
Yes. Up front here after that.
Thank you so much, Prof. and your team, for the great work that you've identified. It's a big contribution to humanity. And congratulations upon this great grant. My questions relate to one, the community of practice. Maybe I need to introduce myself. I'm Medal to Inamasco, for those who may not know me. The community of practice took my attention. I would like to know more about what activities will be undertaken in this community of practice, and where is the role of community in all this, because I believe implementation science gets more relevance, especially when it fits in the philosophy of master of community engagement. So how do we locate the community in this? Because I believe there are identified cases from literature for dementia, for epilepsy, alcohol disorders in most of these communities. And what's your stretch in this community of practice? What's your stretch? What's your scope? Number two relates to the sustainability plan. Oftentimes, you implement such a wonderful grant for 3 years, but then after 3 years, we can't trace anything more. So what strategy do we have? Because this is very, very pertinent in the advent where non-communicable diseases are becoming a big challenge, and more particularly, these that have been identified. So I would like to hear from you sustainability strategies that will aid the transition of this beyond the funding that you have gotten. And lastly, are there any innovation outputs? Of course, as someone interested in innovations, we would be very much glad if there could be some innovation outputs, like digital applications that can detect dementia or all these other diseases, epilepsy and etc., at early stages. So in the training process and programs, do you anticipate some innovation outputs? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Medat. I will address community of practice, and maybe my colleagues will add. So we define community of practice as a group of people who share the same idea. Now, in this case, the Blms NCDs is focusing on specific non-communicable diseases. We talked about mental health, dementia, alcohol use disorders, and epilepsy. And so the community of practice that we intend to set up is people who have the knowledge or expertise in those particular areas. That's going to be kind of like our community, because we intend to use this community to support the trainees to further develop their skills, to help them with career development. And so we bring on board the training advisory committee, the mentors, the students themselves, and other like principal investigators who have training grants that are focused on, let's say, neurological disorders, or focusing on areas that are going to directly contribute to building the capacity of the trainees. Now, in this case, because they are students, we look beyond the 4 disorders. We have the research methods. They are going to be expected to write research proposals. They are going to be having mentored research. So we bring on board biostatisticians. We bring on board epidemiologists, people who are going to help them kind of like consolidate, help them to further develop their areas of interest. That is our idea of community of practice at the moment. I don't know whether you want to add something on the community of practice.
Just to clarify, so we're using the term community in a couple of different ways, and I think perhaps maybe there's a little confusion. So the community of practice idea, I think is exactly what Edith was saying, where there's a intentional bringing together of people with similar ideas, often at different levels of training, with different perspectives, but it's very much a community of researchers, and scientists, and clinicians. We're also talking about communities in terms of engagement with research. And in that sense, community is like the end user, the client, the people literally in the community at large who can impact an individual research project. So I hope that's clear that community can mean a lot of different things. And collectively, we all do come together to learn from each other and support each other and influence the work. But I think there are two separate concepts here in terms of a community of practice of researchers and scientists, clinicians, versus a community that may influence and very, very necessarily influence implementation science. I hope that's clear.
So I think, Dr. Medard, the key word there is practice. That these are people who together do certain things interested in that particular area and so on. So if you have our traditional health practitioners, they carry out a certain practice, a certain role that they play in the community. So they are a community in the broader sense of the meaning, but then we narrow it down with what their area of interest is. That's why we use it. Now, in terms of sustainability or whether we have any strategy beyond funding. So, remember we said we are building capacity. And the key word there is, again, capacity. We're building capacity. If we train people to better understand, to better be able to evaluate people with mental health disorders, to evaluate people with dementia, to be able to understand how these people can be supported, treated, or how the disease can be monitored over time to minimize its development, or if treatable, to treat it effectively enough to allow these people, this person, to live a normal life. So for example, in epilepsy, you can treat epilepsy and somebody can live a fairly normal life. Dementia, however, depending on the level at which you discover the person. So the key thing is we are training people who are going to be able to evaluate persons who may already be showing early signs of cognitive dysfunction. And the earlier you pick them up, the easier for you to treat them or to take care of them. But we don't have that capacity right now because not many people even understand what dementia is about. So our strength is not that along the way, 10 years from now, we are still able to train people. So the funding is giving us opportunity to train people who then, remember we said we want to train people who are already employed in the university. So if they're already university employees, what is the role of a university teacher? To continue to train others. So that is the sustainability plan. If we can plant into these people the capacity to understand these conditions, they will now be replicating this in their students that come along the way. And as for innovations, I will look forward to that because it will depend on the kind of proposals given. Indeed, some of them may even design methods for early detection of dementia in what they're going to do. So all options are open, and we look forward to a successful implementation there. So there was a hand. Oh.
Yeah, just to add a little bit about sustainability. We are creating a training hub, and beyond the funding, we are going to have the courses. And so we should be able to continue offering the courses. We had MUTI, we developed courses in grant research administration and management. Those courses are going to be offered. We are not developing them afresh, but for this particular one, we are developing courses we did not have, like implementation science, a fully fledged course, we should be able to run it beyond the 5 years. So we are thinking about, yes, MAST being able to provide these courses with or without funding, and the mentorship that our mentors are going to get is, going to be extended. They are learning or sharing best practices from their colleagues from the US. There are things that they'll be able to pass across and continue beyond the funding. So sustainability is interwoven or is woven within everything that we are doing, and how we utilize it, I think, will matter.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Wangel Milton, and I bring you greetings from the Vice Chancellor, Stuart University. Well, I had 2 questions, but one has been answered. It was sustainability. But then another one is on the short courses, which has been answered. Will these courses be sponsored? 2. That is 1. 2. Will it only be for the partner institutions, or they will be open to other institutions? Thank you.
Thank you. The short courses, for now, from the presentation, we talked about MAST, BSU, and DERA universities. Now, big classes normally are not very good, so we intend to have kind of like a rotational arrangement where we shall have facilitators move to DERA University and offering the training at DERA University. So DERA University does not have to come to Bara, but the facilitators will go to them. Similarly, we'll do for BSU so that we can have a good number of people benefiting from the short courses. I guess that answers the question of, will it be sponsored? For now, the project is going to provide the training. The project is going to facilitate the trainers, but we believe that the faculty members who will be attending from the respective institutions will be learning and should be able to continue training once MAST has gone out of your institutions.
I think the question of will it be open to everyone is similar to the one about the PhD. That the adverts, as you had said, will be within the institutional website. So when we call for our people to apply for the short course, we expect that within your institution there will be sufficient number of people who would want to come. And as it is said, we want manageable classes, a manageable number of people in the class. If we are offering a course now, this class is too many. We expect between 15 and not more than 20 people to participate in the training. And then, as we had said earlier, it is going to be repeated on a yearly basis. The frequency we shall determine to see. In the multi project, we had offered yearly courses, but later on we realized due to demand, we had to train more than once a year for some of the courses. So really depend on the kind of response we're going to get. But still within the 3 institutions. Angela, I think we have overshot our time.
Yes.
Now we should be doing something else. But otherwise, thank you for your wonderful questions.
Professor, questions are never wonderful. They are fired. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats back. Thank you for the time here, and we really appreciate the immediate answering of the questions. Thank you. Professor, your grandchild asked about the book you're going to launch. So ladies and gentlemen, PK and your team, can you bring the book? Dr. Godfrey Mjenyi, while you are away, They talked about launching a book, and you're an icon. Please stand up for recognition. Please stand up for recognition. Please come forward, because at graduation they brought you forward. Keep clapping till he gets here. Clap, 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 clap. Dr. God, if you're not here, we shall not stop. And the book is already here. So Dr. Godfrey wrote a book in relation to obstetrics and gynecology, and it's to help anyone, especially the students who are going to join clinical work and they're scared. Why am I talking about your book? Why am I the ones clapping? Thank you. Nathan, thank you for clapping till he got here. Please, don't go to the guest of honor. Who has told you? You're here. Yes, I'm here talking about things I'm trying to gamble with. Tell us briefly, because we have universities here. We have LIRA, we have BSU, we have California, we have Massachusetts. I'm marketing your book.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Thank you, guest of honor. Thank you, Dr. Jessica. You've been my mentor. I'm happy to find you here. Thank you, Dr. Edith, and the rest. In the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, we embarked on a piece of work to put in place a one-stop center for reference for clinicians, for medical, nursing, and just generally health science students. We put together literature from different sources, from expertise of different people, and compiled a book, and it is entitled Obstetrics Care Handbook. It's available in hard copy. If you need a copy, you can contact us, and I think we shall share the details with Angela so that you can post our flyer on the website for this capacity building project. Thank you.
That's enough, but wait, don't go. There's no announcement that is for free, so do you want to contribute towards BIMS? I'm the BIMS, so you've made an announcement. It's just 50,000. Please take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite the mentors. Okay, they have forgotten. Professor Samuel Manning, Dr. Ashaba, Dr. Ochan Moses, Dr. Jessica Gaba, and I would request a representative from each university to join the PIs as we launch this project.
Yes, please. Bishop Stewart University, please.
Bishop Stewart, someone from MUST. Those who are not shy. Najuma, you are wearing a beautiful color that will match with our cake. Najuma Josephine, you're selected. Please clap for her. Josephine Najuma, she ran out. Esther? Yes, Najuma has come back. Please just come straight forward. Josephine, thank you. BSU is here?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think we're all here. So let's hold the knife, and we're cutting it COVID style. Now you're going to see. Hold the knife. Hold the knife, and the rest holds the air. Thank you. Yeah. Push in front a bit, much as you're holding the air. 2, 3. Please pull in, Dr. Sekola. Push in. Yes, around the cake. I'm not seeing Dr. Jessica. Please move forward. Yes, Josephine, pull in. Yes, hold in air. 3, 2. This one's a scientist. Go down. 2.5. Cut. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, now the Vice Chancellor has the word to officially launch.
With the cake having been successfully cut, I now declare BIM's NCD officially launched. And may we eat the cake until nothing is left.
Yes, you can take your seats. I have my flower girls. PK, Vanessa. Ladies and gentlemen, as Josephine is doing something, let's all help her. But it's polite enough to know the people who have been in the house. As Josephine is doing that, I'll request my communication crew to give the microphone starting from the row behind the mentors where Rachel is. And we introduce ourselves as the cake is coming out. Please, much as they said we should finish it, glucose levels, and if you're diabetic, you're allowed to give the cake to me. Yes, let's go. We do recognize the services of our service providers. AIT, can I have someone from AIT? Please come and tell us what AIT is, because that's a word from the north.
Okay, I at least understand that it has something to do with Prof, at least. But yes, AIT is Empower Youth in Technology, which is a tech hub here in Barara. I was so happy when one of the doctors actually advocated for digital kind of interventions in this very project. Very, very interesting. But yes, we also, the hub is meant to incubate digital innovations or digital ideas or digital startups. And that's how AIT TV came to be on board. We are a TV that is broadcasting live on Facebook, YouTube. We have a mobile app. We also have a web, all those platforms, at least we broadcast there. And now we leverage a lot on virtual events just like this. Now in case you have one, it could be another launch that you're planning, it could be your birthday or whatever event at least that you have. We let you connect with the audiences that are not able to get to the event physically. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You didn't tell the people your names.
Sorry, that was for emphasis. I am called Sankara Vyaruhanga. I'm a director in charge of marketing and business communication at AIT.
You go, you're taking my job, marketing communication. Start the introductions, please. It's called Sankara, remember? So just hurry up.
I am Rachel Luaga. I work in Bishop Stewart University.
Good evening. I'm Valence Nyonzma. I work at MAST in the Department of Nursing.
You mentioned the specialty. I'll even go back to Rachel, because if you work in Bishop Stewart, are you the VC? Okay.
I work in the nursing department. I'm a lecturer.
Okay.
I'm Nathan Kakonji. I'm a lecturer of biochemistry at MAST.
And a baptizer?
Yes.
My name is Clara Descent Haire. I am from the Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies at Barara University of Science and Technology.
Psychiatric nursing officer and a student of MAST.
Thank you. I look like this without the mask. I'm Dr. Model. I'm the Director of Quality Assurance, Bishop Stewart University.
This side they haven't seen me. I'm Otwine Ann Toheyo. Oh.
Otwine Ann Tweheyo, Bishop Stewart University, Dean Faculty of Nursing and Health Sciences, and I am a psychologist.
Good evening. My name is Godwin Tuachire. I work at the Department of Psychiatry, Bara Regional Referral Hospital. I am into data analysis.
I am Dr. Pamela Uma, SHO Psychiatry, MAST.
Yeah, I'm Kayoko Badru, also SHO, Yato Psychiatry.
Good evening, I'm Harper. I'm a doctor of psychology. I work with Kawari University, the Department of Mental Health, and I'm a mentor.
Yes, I'm Dr. Chidawele Joseph. I'm a psychiatrist and senior lecturer at Stemai University.
Good evening, everyone. Tutamwebwa Kawagambe Thomas, Principal PCO, Bara Regional Referral Hospital. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Mansi Vincent. I'm a family physician, a lecturer at Bara University, and I'm a Madri Fellow.
What? Madri Fellow? I'm just teasing you. Madri, it's Madri.
I'm Judith Okhaisa, a former Madri Fellow and an aspiring PhD student on Blms NCD project.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Favina Alan, and I'm SHO in second year psychiatry.
Okay, good evening. I'm John Abatio, SHO Psychiatry, Bara University.
Good evening, everyone. I'm called Dr. Emmanuel Ayol. I'm a second year SHO at the Department of Psychiatry, MAST.
Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Kamoga Ronald from the Department of Anatomy. I assist lecturers in that department, and I'm a Madri Fellow. I'm a serious aspirant or prospective PhD contestant on Blms, NCD. Thank you very much for bringing this program here. I'm also a PhD fellow. I already have my admission, so I have those who are planning, I'm already somewhere. So, and I'm working on Alzheimer's. So thank you very much. I thank God also for this opportunity.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Ugonza Tony, first year psychiatry resident, Bara University.
Yes, good evening once again. I'm Dr. Wega Abel, third year SHO, Department of Psychiatry, MAST. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Rahel Mkola, resident psychiatry year 3, Bara University.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Letizia Tim, psychiatrist.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Untitled, Bara University of Science and Technology, runs officer as a finance manager.
Good evening, everyone. Alex Babazi, I'm from Department of Psychiatry, Bara Regional Hospital.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Esther Kunda, Bara University of Science and Technology.
Good evening, everyone. I was Margaret. I'm a grants administrator. Let's rise for the anthems. Barara University, succeed we must. With God's will, we shall make the best of must. Let us unite and cooperate to build the nation in different sectors. Our pride and ego must will shine forever and will be victors. My alma mater, long live Barara University, utlimu viva. Mungu tawomba ilinde Jumuiya Afrika Mashariki, tuwezeshe kuishi kwa amani, tutimize na malengo yetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. O Uganda, may God uphold thee. We lay our future in thy hands. United, free, for liberty, together we'll always stand. Closing prayer.
Let's have ourselves with prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for everything that has transpired in this place. Thank you for the gift of life to all of us, and for everyone that you brought here, Lord. I pray for safe journey masses as we travel back to our respective places, and continue to give us good ideas that can be translated into good practice that can benefit our communities where we come from as academicians and researchers in this part of the world. I pray all this through the name of Jesus Christ, your Son. Amen.
Thank you so much. Professor, for someone to qualify for the scholarship, they must sing the must anthem. Yes, Kamokasa. Yes, I heard you singing, so you qualify. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not leave the tea. Let's have a cup of tea, meet and greet, and know each other. Those people at Madri, tell them what Madri is. Those at BIMS, aspirants, please tell them. Thank you, our mentors, thank you, our TAC members, and all of you for coming. Succeed, we must.